So, Ro Robertson, your exhibition, The Ribs Begin to Rise, begins tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you've just got your installation set up, ready, and it has the same name as the whole of the exhibition. Can you tell us a bit about what it's about?
Yeah, so I like to think of it as the title work for the exhibition. It's a brand new installation, brings together elements of video, sound, sculpture and light, and also some wall drawing around the outside of the space. So yeah, it's titled The Ribs Begin to Rise, after that moment that a ship begins to take place. So yeah, the structures ascend in height as if we're on this journey through the landscape, and with the structure sort of leading to the video, which was filmed on a walk down the river weir from Pallion, where I was brought up, all the way down to the mouth of the river at Roker. And then it leads into some footage that was filmed in the welding studio. So it's a sort of meditation on that moment of two pieces of steel joining as they're welded, and the flux and the light and the smoke that comes from that moment. So I use arc welding using electricity. It's quite a charged moment in lots of ways. This is the first time, I mean, I get to experience that moment. It's quite terrifying and quite exciting at the same time when you're welding. You're in a when you're wearing a welding mask, it's completely darkened at the moment that you're creating your work, apart from that flare of the light as it sort of sparks and as the steel's connecting. So all you see really is this very extreme flash of light, this extreme flash of moving light. And
that's all very, very relevant to here, because we're in Sunderland, your hometown, which was for decades a central point for shipbuilding.
Yeah.
And we're right on the river weir. The gallery is right on the river.
Yeah, we're on the site of the shipyards now, and so I wanted to just bring in that visceral experience, and the soundscape, or the sound during that time would have been so intense. It would have been such a part of everyone's day-to-day lives that I imagine people went home and they could probably still hear that noise of what they'd been sort of working on during the day.
You do tend to connect with what you're doing quite physically, don't you?
Yeah.
You tend to actually get into the water and get into the landscape and work in the landscape.
Yeah, it's about that. I think submersion as well, certainly with the water, it's about that. So some of the footage in this video is underwater, the body's connection with water, but also that contrast between when you're welding, you're very protected from your materials and your environment, so you're in full protective clothing. Like I say, you're in quite a darkened space because the welding mask's blocking out all the light. And it can be quite it's quite an interesting space to be in as well, that disconnection. You have a different relationship with the material, but to go from that then into the natural landscape, and it to be about more vast open spaces and about bodily connection with being connected with your environment, or the sensation between the skin and water or skin and rock. It informs quite a lot of the work to go between those two spaces through the different ways of making.
But the boundary between the body and the environment around it.
Yeah.
And also the man-made and the natural, which is a lot of this video. You're moving between those two, aren't you?
Yeah, I think it's about that space between that continuously fluid place and that space of construction, or something definitely being joined together, definitely being put together in a certain way that's
and why are we saying man-made?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that you got very interested in, I think, was the 700 female shipbuilders who worked here during the wars,
yeah,
particularly the Second World War.
Exactly. I think our relationship with construction and with putting two things together and with things like structure and architecture is very driven by, is very male-dominated, and we do use language like man-made, and it is good to start thinking about that differently and use different language around it. And one of the ways that opened up for me was through an understanding of the women who worked in the shipyards. So yeah, there were 700 women who worked during World War II in the shipyards in Sunderland, and they really brought a different connection with my understanding of material when I learned about those women. who were working with a very heavy, very harsh material in a very intense environment on a day-to-day basis in ways that they weren't expected to, so they were stepping outside of what was expected from them. Probably my journey with sculpture, I think, has some parallels with stepping into that industry. It was a time of, people describe it as the women were in the shipyards only because of a time of emergency, but I think there would have been women who worked in that environment who really took to it and actually wanted to sort of work in the way that they ended up working in. And that's been my journey with sculpture, really. I don't think it was particularly expected of me as a young working class girl and then a young queer woman to work with the material that I'm working in to make welded steel sculptures. There's probably part of me that has stepped into that space because it's something that you're not expected to sort of do, that's been very dominated by one group of people.
And you've combined that, though, with something much softer, possibly, and certainly more natural, like your drawings, which you often make outside, actually in the landscape, don't you? And you have done here, in the area between here and the sea.
Yeah, there's a sort of interplay between softness and hardness and fluidity and more rigid sort of relationships with material that I like to subvert the qualities of steel, but also I'm really interested in just these very visceral contrasts. But it's a connection with material that would have directly been here on the River Wear. I see it as a living thing in a way that was holding people. It sustained people's lives. You can read the two materials in terms of femininity and masculinity. Water as being a sort of holding feminine sort of qualities and being softer, and steel as being this rigid masculine sort of material. But for me, I just like to put everything together in a cycle that these boundaries that were put between things should be questioned, I think, and that we can move between things. You can understand fluidity, you can understand the rigid nature of material at the same time. So it's
a lot of your steel sculptures actually have a lot of curves and a lot of surface colour and differences of sheen. They're not hard in a simple sense.
Yeah, I think it's about highlighting how sensitive it is as a material actually as well. The surface can be very powdery and it's quite a porous material, and especially when you've treated the surface in a certain way. So I go through different processes with the steel, so I can use like an angle grinder or kind of just quite simple ways of using like wire brush to just put texture on the surface, so it kind of responds to water more easily, and then the process after you've sort of keyed the surface becomes like really fast. So it changes from this material that feels very heavy and quite slow to work with to something that like speeds up really quickly. So when you do weld and two sheets of steel come together, it happens quite quickly, or when the surface changes, it happens quite quickly. So it's about these different speeds.
And you've brought that shipbuilding thing together by actually using water on the surface of the steel that you're sculpting with.
Yeah, I'm quite interested, I think, in the protective qualities of steel in a way. So steel would have been used as this giant monumental skin of a ship it's literally about keeping water from us. We're kind of separating ourselves from the elements in a way. But also we use very industrial marine paints to protect the steel from the water as well. I'm interested in these surfaces, like skin type surfaces, kind of drawing a comparison really between the surface of steel and the surface of our bodies. Yeah, these barriers or these boundaries between ourselves and the forces of the natural environment, and how we try and separate ourselves from those forces.
Shall we go outside and have a further chat by the river?
Yeah.
How fantastic to have your first solo institutional exhibition in your hometown in Sunderland. How much difference does that make?
It's made a big difference actually. So it's my first institutional solo show, but it's also the first time that I've worked directly with the inspirations of my hometown, and in particular I think the industrial heritage of the place that I'm from, in connection with my sculptural understanding and my understanding of materials. And so it's it's something that's always been there in the work, but to actually be back in Sunderland and to be making work here for the show, that's been a really amazing experience. I've made works that I would never have made anywhere else, and so I am quite influenced by place and site and the environment that I'm working in, but I've never had the chance to be an artist and be in Sunderland. And yeah, so some of the new works that are in the exhibition are based on specific sites that I've started outside. So I've worked on plein air, out on the riverside, down at Roker, and yeah, it was important to me it's all new work that's been made this year. It's not a sort of mini survey looking at recent works made elsewhere. It's very much about Sunderland and the fabric of the landscape, and also family history and the people who live here, and community as well.
So how much do you remember? I mean, how much is it about your childhood? What was it like growing up here?
So those experiences of growing up here, those formative experiences are really embedded in the work. And what I've realised is that as I've sustained a sculptural practice for longer, I've understood more that those inspirations from heavy industry, of working with steel, of the relationship between the body and material, and monumental structures that were built here on the riverside, which is a place that I lived close to when I was young. So when I first grew up, we lived in Pallion, and which is really close to the riverside, and it was where most of the housing, or a lot of the housing, was for the workers who worked in the shipyards and in the mines. So yeah, I grew up in an ex-miner's cottage, in a tiny red brick cottage in Pallion, and if you can imagine, it was quite tightly packed, single-storey red brick cottages, all kind of connected by these back lanes, and it was this very, I think it formed my first understanding of structure and space and my relationship to it, which was a little bit restricting as well. It was obviously through creativity I found a lot of freedom and expression, and explored my surroundings, but it was, considering we're so close to the river and to the sort of the mouth of the river that opens up into the sea, which is a very an experience of the landscape opening up, and you know, ships were launched here that went around the world. So there's this, on my doorstep there was this great energy, but in the tight-knit sort of place that we lived, I did have a sense of restriction, that you can't quite get out of those tightly packed housing areas, or that working class communities didn't necessarily have that connection with the natural landscape in terms of the freedom that can be provided by, I think, the natural landscape, the river, and of the sea. So the connection with the water and the sea was very much a connection with work, and that's how people's identities were constructed.
Was it also slightly socially restrictive? I mean, growing up as somebody who's queer or non-binary in 1990 Sunderland possibly wasn't particularly easy? Yeah,
I mean, I don't think that was even part of anyone's understanding or vocabulary. So I was very much obviously raised as a young working class girl in a underprivileged area from a working class background. There was very little privilege involved in that sort of situation growing up, in terms of resources, travel, sort of anything. Like, for example, being an artist definitely wasn't on the cards, a part of what was sort of expected of a young working class girl from that place at that time.
So how did you break out of that?
I think I was always creative, always really inquisitive about my surroundings, and always was interested in how things were put together, or people's relationship to space and architecture. And as soon as, I think it was the natural environment that really started to spark my interest as an artist. So it was actually a walk that I did to the river Weir from Pallion as a young person. Doing that by myself for the first time was probably the first time that my imagination really started to open up, and I was thinking, there was the freedom of the water and the river, but there was also, I think, my first like sculptural understandings of walking under the bridges for the first time, and starting to understand volume, space, listening to surroundings, and so walking below the Alexandra Bridge and the Weir Bridge, and sort of starting my own understanding of how things put together, looking at structures, kind of thinking architecturally really at that age. It was very much a personal pursuit though.
And that was at what age?
I mean,
the walk?
I think I was 14 when I first did that walk by myself.
No, I think it's interesting that you were so drawn to the women shipbuilders. I mean, I think you've described yourself as a queer feminist.
Yeah.
Which is so that all tied together. And to what extent do you think your non-binary identity has an impact on your work?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it in terms of the work that I've made here as well, because the female shipbuilders in Sunderland have been a big inspiration, like I say, to my understanding of material. But I think about these gaps in our history and these people who've never really been understood, or the language has never been there to completely embed all the different types of LGBTQ people who exist in lots of different ways. Our histories have always become quite sort of binary, and our understandings have kind of lost people's experiences along the way. So queer people have never properly been documented in a way that was true to how they lived or what their lives would have been like. Erasure is a big part of our history, and so I think there was the female shipbuilders, but there would have been women within that group of women who were like me, who were butch lesbians, who were maybe non-binary, probably trans men as well, who were drawn to working in that environment at that time because it would have resonated more with who they were in terms of, and women in general. Like this whole group of people, there's more, with more shared experience between that group of people than we have sort of differences. And there would have been women and people drawn to work in the shipyards at that time because it would have been a way that they could have connected more with their own physicality, understood their own strength, had an understanding of this experience that was kind of kept only for men, or understood only in terms of masculinity. Or so I just think of those women and those people who have got forgotten over time, the butch lesbians, the women who might have met at the shipyards and ended up together. There's a lesbian history there. There's but unfortunately the story kind of changes over time, and we only end up learning about.
Well, and at the end of the war, the women were sent back
yeah.
to what they'd been doing before the war, weren't they?
Yeah, and it's explained in terms of it was times of emergency and necessity. So, and that people didn't want to be doing what they were doing. I think there would have been people who absolutely relished the opportunity to do what they were doing at that time and learn things about themselves that they didn't know.
And were your family involved in shipbuilding? Because I mean, shipbuilding is obviously really key along this river.
Yeah, so on my dad's side, his dad and his dad as well, so my grandfather and great-grandfather were shipbuilders. I imagine it went further back than that as well. So on my dad's side, it was generally shipbuilding and seafaring. I've actually named one of the works in the exhibition Holder Up. That was my great-grandfather's job title. I was just really struck by the fact that someone's probably whole existence on a day-to-day basis was given that title, Holder Up, and just that act of holding up material, but also I'm kind of used it as a metaphor in a way of kind of what we all uphold, or this idea of the weight of what we inherit, and the job role of a holder up was someone who continuously held rivets in place for the riveter to hammer in. So very labour intensive, physical, difficult sort of job, and I was kind of struck by the communication between two people who would have been working in pairs over a long period of time in an environment that was so noisy that you wouldn't be able to hear each other. So it would have been very much about, I think, movement or understanding what each other was going to do next through gesture, and understanding each other in a non-verbal sort of way, communicating through your body and understanding your own physicality in terms of the material that you're working with, and also the very like dangerous environment that you would have been in, this like heightened sense of physicality.
I mean, you've worked with steel for a while. Did you realise when you started working with steel that perhaps it was due to your background, or is that something that you now think was the case?
It wasn't sort of done in that intentional way, so I didn't learn about the history and then start working with steel. It's something that I naturally was drawn to in a way that I probably didn't fully understand at the time when I first started using it. But then over time I've definitely understood where that inspiration must have come from, and I do believe in an idea of like physical memory, or kind of inheriting these like a physical memory that I feel connected to the people of my family who worked with this material when I'm working with it. So that time in the studio when I'm lifting this quite heavy material, and it's a labour-intensive time in the studio sometimes, so I feel like connection through that workplace that would have been here on the river that was very industrial and noisy. It kind of feels like it's mirrored in the studio through the process.
You do tend to engage quite directly with your landscapes and environments when you're making work, don't you? I mean, I know that you swim, for example, and that comes through in some of the work, that you actually get into the water, you don't just observe it.
Yeah.
How does that fit in with all of this?
So I think I work from a place of it's more about a sense of a place or a feeling or a memory, and it's like usually from a multi-sensory sort of place as well. So it'd be about the sound or the sensation, or often works will be connected to a site, but it'll only be afterwards when I draw on that like experience. So it's almost like you're filtering it through time and memory, and it changes slightly, changes shape slightly, and then it becomes less of a like a representation, a direct representation of a place, and more of a sense or a feeling.
You've got two large the drawings with colour,
yeah.
Called Plunge. Can you tell us a bit about those? Because they're very much in that connecting
Yeah, so that work,
area.
it is dedicated to the River Wear, but it was painted down in St Ives in my studio at Porthmeor Studios, and it was at a time when I was sort of drawing on the memory of Sunderland, and like the story I just told you about discovering the water for the first time. But also this idea that, so I was born in 1984, year of the miners' strike. The last ship launched in Sunderland in 1988. So I was very small, living in this sort of period that came afterwards, which was a sort of a hangover, sort of as a sort of emptiness about the place that I grew up and lived. But what I was drawn on with the plunge is the joyous sort of inspiration of the water, and that experience of I was just imagining ships being built and it being such a momentous sort of occasion, and when the ships were being launched into the plunge, just this energetic moment of the water sort of separating, and the energy of that energetic sort of moment. So yeah, I've titled it The Plunge. It's just this almost like continuous movement of the water moving away in two opposite directions, and it combines this sort of reddish, oxidised, more bodily oranges and reds that run through the greens and the blues.
And water seems to be quite important for you overall.
I think water runs through the work. It runs through as a metaphor for a few different things, but usually as a metaphor for fluidity and freedom. So yeah, with this exhibition, it's been particularly thinking about the landscape and the riverside and the sea.
You've got another exhibition, well, you've got several other exhibitions going on at the moment, but one of them is at Walterton Hall in Norfolk, where you've got a small exhibition called Sea State with Maggie Hamling.
Yeah.
And of course, she's well known for painting the sea, has done it for decades. Was she an influence on you at all?
Yeah, she definitely was. An influence in terms of really allowing the work, I think, to flow through you in a very direct way, and making very visceral work that, and I wouldn't say that I've always worked in that way. It's something that I definitely aspired to, and Maggie Hamlin was one of those artists who felt everything that she did, and I think, well, for me, I think it takes time to get to that place.
She does talk about her best paintings painting themselves, doesn't she?
So,
and you've talked about a certain amount of allowing some of your drawings, particularly the ones done in the landscape, to be sort of semi-automatic?
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking of?
So you become hopefully attuned to your surroundings and your environment, and also slight changes in the environment. Or, I think I like to describe it as being a filter in a way. These sort of inspirations from the landscape, or it's not just about inspiration, actually it's about the forces of nature, and allowing yourself to be part of that. So hopefully you become part of a flow of life. Really, that's what it feels like, that that these things are starting to flow through you, and then they're coming through the other end in a way that represents them in a way that hopefully connects with other people. But yeah, you definitely become a sort of vessel or a filter, that you're just part of a process. I think that's something that definitely have learned through Maggie Hamlin, and allowing yourself to do that. It can be, it's quite an emotional experience. You're opening yourself up to lots of things. So I think with Maggie Hamlin, and it's not just about the natural landscape, it's about that personal connection as well with people. The sea can be a mirror, I think, for lots of different things in life, and can help carry us through lots of different personal journeys. So yeah, it's about allowing yourself to use those autobiographical or personal memories and be a sort of open channel at the same time. So
yes, that's quite a vulnerable thing to do, isn't it?
There's definitely a vulnerability in it, and I think there's a vulnerability in sharing your personal connections and memories and relationships as well.
How was it to see those hanging together?
We were both happy with how they resonated with each other, and yeah, the scale. There was colours that were shared between us, that we'd picked up on from different places, that we're both quite surprised about.
You weren't aware of that, because there definitely are colours that are shared.
And we're both working with the inspirations of two quite different sort of seas as well. So I'm in West Cornwall, and Penzance, and it's the Atlantic and the Celtic Sea actually at St Ives, and Maggie Hamlin obviously with the North Sea. And yeah, I think one thing that we both do is probably really draw out. So I think Maggie Hamlin is always surprised by how people think that the North Sea is such a grey, sort of massive like greyness, but she sees the colours that are there, and picks up on them little flecks of bronze and sort of gold that come through, and there's little moments of gold and through the rust that kind of were ascending through my swell sculpture that seemed to be picked up by Maggie Hamlin's paintings.
And you're now based in Cornwall, and you've also got some work currently in Tate St Ives, which is also water related, and about that coast. Yeah,
so that was, I think I'm starting to perhaps understand works as a bit of maybe in a similar way as Maggie Hamlin describes works as alternative portraits. Sometimes I think of them in a way of maybe as a portrait of a place, or a bit of a love letter to a place. So my interlude installation, which was a new commission for Tate St Ives in 2024, that's my love letter to St Ives, and it's very St Ives centric. So it was made when I was at Porthmeor Studios for the second time in Studio 9, which is one of the sea-facing studios. And yeah, so that sculpture is made in two parts, titled Interlude, and it's that connection. So interlude is a sort of a musical break, or a break, or this sort of lesser known thing in between two more like known parts. So I was thinking of Porthmeor Beach and sort of the rocky headlands with the island on one side and Man's Head on the other side, and just this idea of a constant passage of water and it being ever changing. So yeah, the installation's been designed with a bit like a channel in between, that people can occupy the space between the sculptures and get viewpoints from both different sides.
And I think you've also got something in Salisbury Cathedral at the moment, which has a fantastic setting with stained glass windows behind it. I mean, the light is extraordinary.
Yeah,
but again, it's a water-related subject, isn't it?
Yeah, so the exhibition's called Live in Water, curated by Beth Hughes, and what's really nice about the selection of work for this exhibition is that my sculpture is titled Alcove, so it is about the coastal landscape, but this one was a little bit more about the sort of hidden spaces of the coastal landscape, so sort of caves and archways. The title's borrowed from a work by Ethel Colquhoun, and I was thinking about these spaces that could be seen as quite bodily or of the landscape at the same time. So it has these two arch-like spaces that sort of cross each other, and for me they could be seen as the space of the legs, or the sort of the archway that you can make with your own arm. So yeah, it's an incredible sort of setting for the work to have it within the sort of beautiful archway spaces of Salisbury Cathedral. It's really resonating with the structures and spaces within the sculpture. And yeah, I think with that exhibition it's about the connection with the water sort of below the surface as well. So Beth was really interested in the waterways that still run underground below and through the cathedral and the cathedral, so it's picking up on these sort of energy centres of where water runs through the earth.